Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, great. So I just posted the link to come here, so people are probably going to be showing up in the next couple minutes, which is fine. The study guide's been up since, I think, Saturday, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it and to begin to fill it in to make the most of your session for review tomorrow with Devin. And the exam one instructions are also up on Moodle, so have a look at those. They're a little bit detailed, so please take time to read through them carefully to make sure you understand the different steps. And just be aware that when you do open the exam, that is the time that your 2-hour window will begin at. So be sure you're ready to do the exam before you actually press, before you double click on the exam one submission, turn it in link. So today we're going to have our last lecture before the exam. It's one of my favorite parts of the history of modern Japan. So I gave you a chance to look at a part of an older lecture that I've given that talks about some things that I'll touch on them briefly today, but I want to focus on the last part that I think is most mundane to our exam and to the class for today. So at the end of class, I'm going to ask you to go to Moodle and to click on the document called, let's see, it is called the Imperial Restrict on Education. The Imperial Restrict on Education. So I'll ask you to do that. So just be sure you have Moodle somewhere that you can get to, maybe in another window if possible. We're going to use that document at the end of class. Okay, So let's go ahead and get started. Where is my Zoom? There. Screen share and get started. Okay, so we good. Yeah. So just a couple things that the video that I had you watch talked about. The time period leading up to the major restoration and the arrival of Commodore Perry is a time of religious turmoil and also revival and renewal and just sort of searching. And a whole sort of new trend of Japanese new religions begins to develop in that time period, and then they will grow in number and in diversify over the next century and a half. The first one I want to talk about is Kurozomi-kyo, which is a religion that is founded by a Shinto priest who gets very sick, as I mentioned in another PowerPoint that you, in the video that you've already watched, hopefully. And he basically, he is living here in it's hard for me to see that with my screen, so I'm going to skip that. But anyway, so he discovers that he is able, through just fully immersing himself in the sun and the sun goddess who lives in who is the sun Amaterasu, to become to heal himself. And then he sort of moves from this to have emotional as well as spiritual healing beyond the physical healing. And then this becomes the major sort of focus of his religion, which is actually promoting harmony and human equality. And he has followers all over Japan, sort of spreading out from central Japan. He becomes very popular. And this is definitely not a Shinto Orthodox religion that he has founded. Another group that I mentioned in the PowerPoint that you could have watched for today is Tenrikyo, another single founder religion, new religion in Japan, a woman who had a difficult life and realized when she was very sick that she was going to die, but was healed from that sickness by a benevolent God the parent figure who then gave her powers to prophesize and also to heal women in particular, and to administer safe childbirth rituals. So this religion that she founds is all about, and this is Miki Nakayama. She is here in Tenri, which is sort of next to Nara over here. She is going to be preaching benevolence and charity, and sort of reciprocity and environmental awareness as well, and trying to make sure that things are clean and healthy, and mindfulness. And her religion begins to have many followers, especially as we get towards the late 1800s and she dies. It picks up a lot of steam. The last one I want to talk about, of course, is Christianity, who I mentioned again in the video that you watched already. This is a religion that was, for all intents and purposes, it was exterminated in Japan. It was suppressed. The in-depth campaign to root out Christianity and to punish believers and force them to apostatize, to renounce Christianity, was very effective. But a very small number, maybe a few thousand overall, managed to sort of escape. And they went to go live in places that were beyond the reach or interest of the shogunate. This is over in the Kotai Islands, which are near Nagasaki, over here, blown up for you to see in more detail. They lived there, and they lived amongst themselves and practiced Christianity, and they lacked any sort of Christian structure from the outside or any sort of supervision from the central sort of Catholic religious institutions that were in Japan before. But they kept on, and they tried to maintain their beliefs. They even would find ways to disguise their religion by, hiding images of Jesus and Mary in icons that were Buddhist and that or Buddhist looking that were able to fool officials if they ever did come looking for Christians. As I mentioned perhaps briefly last time, right, the big story in Christianity in Japan, in modern Japan, that begins the new story for Christianity in Japan is when these people over in the Goto Islands, they hear about the return of Westerners to Japan, they're right away interested in trying to find if there are priests who've come back to Japan as well. And they, in Nagasaki, the Paris for Missionary Society has built the church in '64. And as soon as the church is built, these people show up and they right away begin to try and reintegrate into the church. This is a long story that I mentioned, I think, a little bit in the video, but this leads to persecution because the government has still at this point maintained the illegality of Christianity that we talked about a few weeks ago. And the new Meiji government that comes into power in '68 continues, it reissues these edicts that make Christianity illegal. So what I want to talk about today is religion was really important to the Meiji government in ways that may not be perhaps apparent or sort of foreseeable. And so I want to focus on that a bit. We talked maybe 2 classes ago, or no, last class, about I think it was last week, about the ways in which Buddhism and Shinto coexisted. We talked a bit about the cohabitation of Shinto and Buddhist sites together. We talked about some of the ways in which Buddhist gods and other figures were given Shinto names to sort of help Shinto to have relevance, right, and influence in the midst of a very strong Buddhism during the Edo period. As I also mentioned, the movements to sort of put into action the ideas of Motoi Norinaga and his followers or his intellectual descendants, and to root out Chinese civilization where it was too powerful and influential, and recover Japan's true national and native essence. They began to attack Buddhism and to separate Buddhism, this Chinese import, from Shinto. Back in the 1830s in Mito, in the 1860s, both in Satsuma domain and Choshu domain. And as I mentioned before, this will become a larger policy when the leaders of Choshu and Satsuma, or at least from there, become parts of the new government. We talked about the movement to abolish and destroy Buddhism, and this is a very active movement that began, as we talked about, in domains, becomes a national movement. And I think we talked about the fact that the first year of the new Meiji government is actually sort of marred by many campaigns, local campaigns, to eradicate and punish Buddhism. So while the government is trying to actively suppress Buddhism, I should say, they're trying to actively allow Buddhism to be suppressed, I should say, by those who wish it to be less influential and powerful. They're also interested in promoting Shinto. And that is the real story I want to focus on today. The whole ideology, right, of the emperor being the symbolic and figurative head of the country rests upon this sacred Shinto kingship ideal, and that he is in fact the descendant of the sun goddess. And so one of the things that happens gradually over the 1860s is the reinforcement of the importance of the imperial family's primary or tutelary shrine, Ise shrine, way over in the just sort of next to the areas where Nara and in Mie Prefecture, next to where Nara and Kyoto and Osaka are. There's another, not far away, there's this other area where the imperial family's shrine is located to the sun goddess Amaterasu. And so in the 1868 onwards, the government essentially helps this shrine to become a national shrine, an important shrine, a visible shrine. And they begin to try and make it more important. Throughout the course of the Edo period, the members of the imperial house, who were not, as we talked about before, very powerful, they were oftentimes named chief priest or priestess of Ise Shrine. But it wasn't a super important shrine. It wasn't a very well-known shrine, and it didn't have any Buddhist support because of its sort of purity and its goals. So it sort of was not the center of any of attention during the Edo period. But one of the big drives during the Edo period, during the Meiji period, is to remake Shinto and to make it into a religion that can serve the state and to justify the emperor being really in charge of Japan, but also to sort of promote the right kinds of ideals. And Ise Shrine, which we see here, is part of the process of trying to make Shinto a national religion and one that will be useful for the state and for the country of Japan. So from the very beginning, when this new government declares itself even in the midst, in fact, of the Boshin War in Edo, which they're going to later on rename Tokyo, they want to emphasize the importance of unifying ritual or rite and rule, that these two belong together, right? That the state and religion are actually, they should be closely intertwined together in the person of the emperor. So the very first, in fact, department created by the Meiji government after declaring the charter oath is the Jingikan, or the Department of Divinity, whose job it is to sort of administer ritual on behalf of the emperor and with the emperor for the people of Japan. And they begin to establish a hierarchy of shrines, giving Ise Shrine the top priority, the top spot, and then giving other shrines national or regional or local status. And then in 71, the same year in which the samurai are sort of abolished, we see an important move. The government turns shrines into government institutions, meaning that the government partially owns, but also then supports these institutions. As we'll see in the next several weeks, this doesn't actually work out very well for Shinto. The lack of autonomy and the sort of unreliability of funding does not work out for them very well. But in the first decade of the Meiji period, this is an important change that they go through. So all the land is confiscated for the Meiji government, and then it's given back to them according to their size and their importance. Get this out of the way here. And for a while, they try and basically make Shinto replace Buddhism, right? They try to make registration as a shrine for marriages and for births and for deaths. It doesn't work because people don't actually see Shinto as that kind of a religion. They mostly would go to the Buddhist side of things for all those kinds of activities, but they try. In addition, they also try to amplify the importance of Ise Shrine by promoting by making millions of Ise Shrine talismans and giving them out for free. They're put into the mail. They are promoted throughout the country to try and raise awareness of Ise Shrine. The most important shrine, though, I think, and one that will become a top-ranked shrine just beneath Ise Shrine is Yasukuni Shrine. And I asked you to read about this just about, I think, 4 or 5 pages in an article by a colleague of mine, John Nelson, which describes how this shrine came to be. And as we'll see in class over the next several weeks, the shrine will become more important throughout the pre-war Japan period, but also we'll see it is an important site in post-war Japan as well. So it's a very important site. And it begins, as the article talks about, with the very simple goal of being a shrine for Japan's war dead. So the first national shrine for the war dead of Japan, created in fact to try and imitate the kinds of memorials that the founders of this shrine saw in Europe. Those that hold, Napoleon, for example, in France, they inspired them to have some sort of a national shrine to commemorate the war dead. And Omur Masajido, who, as you may have noticed from the readings and from uh, other sources, is one of the two founding fathers of the Imperial Army from Choshu, and he is the person who launched this idea to create this shrine in 69. And the emperor likes the idea, of course, and his advisors do as well. And so even though the next year Omura actually dies, in 79, a decade later, Emperor Meiji gives this shrine a new name, Yasukuni Shrine. Before it was called the Tokyo Shokonsha, or the Tokyo Shrine for the sort of for the dead. But the new shrine, named Yasukuni, which means ironically peaceful country, gives this shrine a new status as well. It's a special imperial shrine, which is at the highest level beneath the imperial family's tutelary shrine at Ise. And this is Yasukuni Shrine. Today, the very big metal tori is part of its iconic, very visible identity. And as we'll talk about later on, this is a shrine to which people who go fight for Japan, their spirits are enshrined there if they die fighting for Japan. So this is an important shrine for the military, and also the military, the family of those who are in the military. But as we'll talk about, there's some things that arise from that are controversial and worth discussing, but not today. So back to Christianity. This is actually an anti-Christian edict. It stays up even though Japan's opening to the West from 58, when they put into action their treaty with the U.S. They maintain these boards making Christianity illegal. But the Iroquois embassy is able to see that if they don't let Christianity become a legal religion in Japan, Western Christian nations are looking down on them, and they're going to continue to make trade imbalanced and unequal for Japan. And so all of these elements eventually sort of encourage the Iroquois embassy to pass the message along to the half the government that's still left in, at this point, in Tokyo, to decriminalize Christianity. It's not legal yet, but it is decriminalized, and the signs are taken down, the one that you just saw. But to counteract this, right, to avoid Christianity becoming an important religion in Japan, and again, to make sure that Shinto is the most important religion in Japan, those same founders who have at this point come back from the Iroquois embassy, they try and find a way to make Shinto more important for Japan, and they'd failed at mandating, important occasions having to happen at or be registered at Shinto shrines. They had failed that the Talisman campaign was not a super big success. There was some tourism, but it wasn't a big success. But a number of Shinto priests and also Shinto sort of ultra-nationalist figures in the Meiji government agree that they need to create a program, a national program to make Shinto more important. So they create the Department of Divinity, actually, which changes names a bit, but it's the same group of people in the early Meiji period. They establish a Great Teaching Institute. And this is an institute that is going to act as sort of the center source of education on Shinto, but also on sort of Shinto morality for Japan as a whole, and would train people then who would work at the local and the prefectural level teaching institutes as well. So a whole network of schools are created to learn about Shinto, but also about the ideals that Shinto would have people adhere to in their daily lives, in politics and government, in their social lives, as well as in religion. The Great Teaching Campaign had a sort of a very simple mandate. It was to elevate the importance and visibility of Shinto and to indoctrinate and inculcate these sort of Shinto morality. The three important tenets were: people need to comply with the commands to revere the kami and love the nation. So here we see the kami being the Shinto deities isn't the word, but the Shinto religious spiritual beings, and the nation being put together to enlighten or illuminate the principle of heaven and the way of man, which is sort of a borrowing from Confucianism, in fact, but trying to talk about the importance of applying these sort of religious ideals to secular life, and then most importantly, serving the emperor and maintaining the will of the court. So these are what they're trying to instill in people throughout the country through this campaign. One of the hardest things that made this process difficult was that Shinto didn't have enough money or enough spaces to do this kind of campaign. So one of the ways that we can see them very creatively in the Department of Divinity, and later I think it's called the Ministry of Rights by this point, that they are able to come up with is to take over spaces that already exist. So they actually set up the Great Teaching Institute in Zojoji, which is one of the more important. It sort of is the family Buddhist temple for the Tokugawa shogunate in Edo. So they take over this space, kicking all the Buddhist priests out, and they remove all of the Buddhist paraphernalia and imagery, and put up Buddhist icons and elements. And they use this space to train people to sort of proselytize Shinto as a religion, but also as a moral system and a sort of a kind of a patriotic nationalism as well. So who is doing all of this proselytizing, right? Of course, you would imagine Shinto priests are first and foremost those who are tapped to go do this preaching throughout the country. But there was a serious need for people who were literate and who were well spoken and who would be listened to. And so the government actually had to recruit people from. They had to recruit clergy from Japanese new religions like Tenrikyo, who were known as good speakers. They also recruited Buddhist priests, sometimes by sort of coercively, and they also even sometimes recruited school teachers. But the most interesting groups they recruited were entertainers who were good at speaking. So storytellers and bards and kabuki actors were also recruited to come do this preaching. And although the three teachings themselves are not super complicated, when you get beyond that, trying to talk about the sort of Shinto doctrine or doctrine of Shinto applied to daily life, these people were not able to do that, right? So what we see is they oftentimes were sort of cheating in talking about what they wanted to talk about, with a little bit of Shinto sprinkled in. They used guidebooks that helped them to get the message right during this campaign, which lasts for actually a total of 14 years from start to finish. And while it definitely fails, right, to make Shinto into a religion that's comparable in terms of its structure and ideology to Buddhism, they succeed in making people aware of Shinto as Japan's national religion. And that, I think, is a takeaway that's very important to keep in mind. So Shinto is going to be very clearly the religion that people identify with Japanese identity and with the state and with the emperor, and that way they were a success. This next slide is a lot of things. I'm not going to go into all this, but basically what we see is initially we have Shinto as the most important department in this new government. In fact, in terms of ritual, the first one created, They are overseeing rites the emperor is doing, and we'll talk about why that's important in a second. But what we see is over time, this approach sort of begins to falter. So the Shinto priests and administrators who initially were so important lose their standing, and they are then demoted to from a department, from a ministry to a department, and then to a bureau in a different ministry called the Home Ministry. And then at that point, they're going to actually be overseeing other Shinto and Buddhism as well as other things like education, those kinds of things as well. So they kind of lose that separateness that was so important to them. Partly has to do with the fact that the Shinto priests who were part of the original ministry and the department were not able to really sort of agree on a lot of things. They were not able to agree on which were the most important kami. They had their own different lineages and their own sort of sects within Shinto. So in 1884, the government sort of has this realization that they want Shinto to be powerful and influential, but they don't want Shinto priests to be powerful and influential. They want Shinto to serve the state. But they don't want Shinto the state to serve Shinto, essentially. So in 1884, as the Great Teaching Campaign comes to an end, the government essentially separates Shinto as a religion from Shinto as a civil state religion, or sect Shinto from state Shinto. And my colleague at Amherst College, Trip Maxey, has written a book that talks about this very complex and interesting process. But essentially, the government stops funding the shrines that doesn't feel are very important, and it turns Shinto into something that is it turns state Shinto into something that sort of is above religion. That everyone in Japan, no matter what their religion is, should be able to adhere to. And this is actually a very interesting sort of sleight of hand that the government is able to execute. And you know, the new sort of trajectory is that people will need to be loyal to the emperor, obedient to the emperor, and to have these ideals about the nation, regardless of what they believe in terms of, you know, their Christianity or their Buddhist beliefs, etc. And which is part of why the government, a little bit later, as we'll see later on, they legalize Christianity in 1899, and they make it one of Japan's legalized religions. And they also have instilled in 1889 in the Constitution, they also instill freedom of religion, knowing that they're going to still acquire this state Shinto to be universal for everyone in Japan. Emperor Meiji is sort of in the background, and he's suddenly thrust upon the country as this sovereign that is so important and so sacred. But this didn't happen naturally. It had to be created. It had to be sort of carried out. And I want to talk about that next. The emperor was made the high priest of Shinto, and this was proclaimed throughout the country. And he was put at the top of the new hierarchy of shrines that was created in the 1870s. He begins to sort of create a network of ties to important shrines in Japan. So he visits shrines in person now and makes a big deal of it. And the papers come and write about this. So it's a big deal. And Yasukuni, and of course, Ise are the most important shrines for that process. When the emperor performs rites, thanking the kami for something or asking the kami for guidance, these kinds of rituals that are administered by him as a Shinto priest, as well as other Shinto priests, these are performed in public, and the whole country is made aware of all of these things that the emperor is doing. And there's also an effort to create simultaneity, so that people in other parts of Japan can, at the same time as the emperor, do these same rituals, right? So what we see is that they're creating this sense of an imagined community of people throughout Japan, all tied together, looking at the emperor and looking to the emperor, and engaging in Shinto belief and practiced with the emperor at the same time. There is this sort of idea of worshiping from afar, and people look towards towards Tokyo when they do certain rituals because that's where the emperor is. So this really creates, in a very short amount of time, a national awareness throughout the country of the emperor's importance. The emperor, when he came to power, was an unknown figure. People didn't know what to do. When he traveled to Japan as part of a campaign to elevate his visibility and his image, people were not sure if they should bow down, or if they were supposed to throw rice or salt, or if they should run away. They were not really sure. The emperor was not an important figure. They knew only of the shogun, who had a very clear political and social function in society. And so the Meiji government really worked very hard to make him a popular figure that people would recognize and be able to see and know how to behave when they saw him, which is why this is the imperial anniversary, which is happening in the, I think in the early 1900s. And as you can see, it was a big event with lots of fanfare, people all over the country coming to watch the procession in front of the imperial palace, the former shogun's palace in Tokyo. And the Meiji funeral, which we'll talk about after the exam, was also a really big deal. 1912, with the whole country watching, and with reporters and photographers, and everyone sort of turned out to watch the spectacle of the emperor. So they were successful in all of these things, I think is my point. So what I want to get to last is sort of the last piece, perhaps, in this process, right? Excuse me, of making State Shinto into a civil religion that is actually above religion, above freedom of religion, and that preaches the right kinds of nationalism and patriotism for Japan, right kinds of Japanese national identity, comes in the form of a sort of a pledge that people in Japan make, and it is a pledge that comes from the emperor himself, in fact, or so. That's how it's presented. It's actually written by several of his advisors. From the most important is a professor of law at the Imperial University in Tokyo, Inoue Tetsujiro, who you see here. He was an imperial advisor, and he essentially was very much anti-Christian, thinking that it was going to weaken Japan and it was not part of Japan's national essence. He was, in fact, quite, I think, neo-Confucian in his thinking. But anyway, he is part of why they end up putting the emperor in the Constitution as a deity, and he's and he helps write this document. And this document, Imperial Research on Education, in 1890, his hands is definitely all over this document. But this is a really important document. This is a document that every school in Japan had to have a copy of, and that every student in Japan was supposed to know by heart and would recite. And depending on the year, it could be on certain occasions or on a daily basis. It was very important. It was so important, in fact, that when schools burned down, for example, or when there were earthquakes, teachers were supposed to go and make sure that they rescued this important document. When a professor or a teacher mispronounced a part of this rescript, they were sometimes fired, or they were embarrassed and they quit, they resigned. So it's a really important document. And I think this is sort of like the last important piece in the effort to indoctrinate the Japanese into the right kinds of nationalism, patriotism, but all rooted in sort of Shinto as a civil religion. So what I want to do for the last part of class is for us to read this together. When in Japan, in Japanese schools, and also many companies, but in schools in particular, the image of the emperor and the empress were also sacred objects that were also protected and very important. And so students would typically look at the image of the emperor and the empress, and they recite this imperial educational rescript. So I'd like for us all to take a second here as we come towards the end of our time today, and together recite this this document. So I'm going to actually pause the screen share for a second and see if I can't pull up the text for us to look at together. So if you can take a second and go to Moodle yourself, that would be great. And you can pull up the document. So you have it in your hand. I'm going to get mine, and then we're going to read it together. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try and put this in two different screens so we can look at the picture at the same time as the text. I'm going to do a screen share again. Don't need that. Okay. Okay, here we go. So please, if you have a second, you can just maybe stand up. This is a thing that you would definitely do standing up. And imagine that you are a student at a high school or a middle school or elementary school, and we're going to read this together. So I'm actually going to also stand up. It may look weird. I'm not sure if you'll see my stomach or whatever, but that's okay. All right. So. And if you could actually read out loud, that would be great. If you could turn your microphones on so I can hear you, that would be ideal. Great. Okay, so let's get started. Know ye, our subjects, our imperial ancestors, and our empire on a basis of everlasting,
firmly implanted virtue,
have deeply and firmly implanted
subjects that are united in loyalty and
piety have from generation to generation
illustrated the beauty thereof,
the
glory of the fundamental character of
inherent also lies the source of our education. Our subjects are
here and also
subjects to your brothers and sisters, as husbands and wives bear yourselves in modesty,
to your brothers and sisters, husbands and wives,
learning and cultivate art,
as friends, true, bear yourselves in modesty and moderation,
furthermore,
injure benevolence,
good,
and thereby advance good and promote
to learning,
always respect the Constitution,
cultivate arts, and
thereby
thereby
develop
develop
intellectual
intellectual
rise
faculties,
and yourselves graciously to the
steps for
the
religion,
more advanced
the more,
public good and
as public good,
common interests,
promote
always
common
respect the
good,
Constitution and observe the laws. Should
So
an
shall you
emergency
remain to
arrive,
be our
offer
good and
yourselves
faithful
courageously
subjects,
to the
and
state.
illustrious the best traditions of
Guard
your
and maintain the
forefathers.
prosperity of the
and
Here set forth indeed the teachings that we learned from our ancestors to be observed alike by their descendants and subjects, for all ages and true in all subjects.
Yes, the best
For which delay,
as
together in order to teach in common with you subjects, that we may all attain
like by their descendants of the subjects of
subjects
through all ages, through in all ages.
All
It is
ages,
our wish to
spiritually
lay
and
it
to
to heart and
It's
infallible
infallible.
with you, our subjects, that they all attain the same virtue.
It is our wish to lay it to heart in all reverence, in common with you, our subjects that we may all attain to the same virtue. Okay. Thank you for doing that with me. You're on time. So, having read through that together, what kind of emotions do you get when you read this text? And I'm gonna see if I can get some images here. Yeah. What kind of emotions did you feel as you read through this, as you recited this rescript?
It seemed to express a hope that the Japanese population will respect the law, but that could also be potentially loaded to an extent. There could be a second underlying meaning that I'm not entirely picking up on. I don't know if it potentially like displays that the imperial forces slash emperor and his advisors are above the law and that everyone must obey them over the law, or that they represent the law.
I think that you're right on both counts, right? So this is about people obeying the law, right, in the Constitution, but it's also about the importance of the emperor outside of the Constitution. I see a hand up from Alexandra. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a really big resistance to change in it. It's very much, this is the way that things have been done for centuries, as our imperial ancestors, have laid it out to be. And this is the way that it should continue to be. There seems a huge resistance to change.
Okay, so this is it's trying to promote tradition and continuity. Although perhaps some of that continuity, I think we can agree, is fabricated, right? The emperor has not had power for a very long time and has never really been a national leader in Japan. So this is both trying to promote continuity and tradition, but also to erase the parts of the tradition that are not useful to this new state. Other thoughts about sort of how you felt as you read this?
That's a really long pledge.
It's long, says Carrie.
Compared to the United States.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that compared to the United States, it's very long. Like when we have our Pledge of Allegiance, or when we have to speak.
So the Pledge of Allegiance, yeah, that's one thing that I think that sometimes students think this reminds them of. Do you guys still do that at school? The pledge?
I had to, but I grew up in the South, like some of my childhood. They forced us to say it.
Yeah, I'm from Texas. We also had to say it. So
I did it in elementary school. I'm from Massachusetts, though.
In my school, we were supposed to, but I never did.
Yeah, we did it in elementary school.
In my school, we did it all through kindergarten to high school, and in elementary school we also had to sing songs, but then we didn't have to do that part in middle and high school.
Yeah, so songs are often part of this too. So this is, I think, a nice connection that you're making here with the Pledge of Allegiance in the United States. I think that the Pledge of Allegiance is, it's got a lot of things going for it. There's some controversy about it. The word God is in it quite a bit. But I think that this document has some things I want to point out that make it even more religious and more important in terms of religion and the sort of the unity of right and rule that I want to put out, right, R-I-T-E. One of them is that the imperial throne is coeval with heaven and earth. This phrase actually means that the throne is equivalent with, right, and that it is as old as heaven and earth. So this is really a big deal, right? So this is talking about the same things that we read about in the Kojiki and the Kojiki Den of Motoori Norinaga. This is talking about the importance of this in the ancientness of the antiquity of the throne. We also see that the emperor and the descendants are infallible. This document is infallible, right? That's in here as well. We also see this the importance of these Confucian virtues, right? The category we talked about from a few classes ago, Neo-Confucian ideology of the 5 relationships. They're right here in this document. So this is a place where I think your point, Alexandra, about continuity is very valid, right? They or the emperor or people who wrote this for the emperor are pulling on these strings from the Tokugawa era New Confucian handbook on filial piety and loyalty. But they're trying to turn them towards the nation. And the most important line for me is in this paragraph here. Anyone want to guess what the most important part of this might be for me? Looking at this part here, 344. Any ideas? Any hands up? It's hard to see if hands are up. Yeah, Sam, I see your hand.
I think it would be the last paragraph of the first sentence where it's teachings bequeathed by our imperial ancestors is like the continuation of venerating your ancestors and what they've done before you.
Okay, that's important. I wasn't thinking of that, but that's important, right? This is really like trying to underline the importance of continuity, right? This is not a new document that we just made up, although it really is, right? It is a teaching that comes down from, from over a millennium before, and that therefore has this patina, this image, this respectability, right, and this legitimacy. I was thinking about a different part of this page we're looking at right now. I was thinking about the imperative to offer yourselves courageously to the state, and thus maintain the prosperity of our throne. So this is a mandate for people in Japan to offer themselves courageously to the state. So as children, this is what they're promising to do, and they're reading the emperor's words and doing so, and looking at this picture that you see here of the emperor and the empress. So this is a foundational element for state Shinto, even though the word Shinto or Kami don't actually appear in the document. And it sort of, I think, is a nice way to sort of complete the campaign to create state Shinto and to make it a part of people's lives in Japan on an everyday, daily basis, and make sure that they have these ideals of harmony and obedience to the state, and patriotism and love for Japan deeply instilled in their hearts. So that's it for today. Thanks for doing that with me, everybody. We are going to, tomorrow in your groups, you'll talk with Devin to go over the review sheet, and the exam will be available from tomorrow, I think around 5 your time, so you can begin when you want. Just be sure that when you begin, you're ready to begin. Read the instructions carefully. If you have questions, you can email me directly, and I'm happy to try and respond to those questions about the exam. All right? So thank you all, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor
Thank you.
Washington, can you repeat when it starts again? My audio cut out.
So you'll have 2 hours to do the exam starting from when you start, but the exam will be available on Moodle from, I think, 5 o'clock tomorrow, Friday.
Okay. And when is it due by? Sunday, right?
It's due by midnight on Sunday.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.